during the pilgrimage, decided to continue together on another path. Many others, like Michelle and I, decided to continue on. New people also joined. Like Patricio, a young man with a great complexion dressed in elegant clothes, who would also be getting his Compostela but was beginning his tour that day. He had told us that although this was his starting point, he had been traveling the way for a long time. We met him at a party in a bar that was organized to celebrate a welcome and a farewell to different pilgrims. The magic of this city showed me that we all traveled the way, sometimes without even walking, and that each person had a unique story to tell. We spent 2 nights in Lyon, and during the first night we joined a party and shared wine and music until the wee hours of the morning. The second night we spent drinking hot chocolate and praying in the temple. I offered a piece of paper around to collect all the intentions of all those who had decided to abandon or postpone their journey to the Cathedral of Santiago. My walk became a mission full of responsibility, because I had become responsible for carrying the most important desires of each individual, and, even though it meant putting more things in my backpack, this time the burden was a noble one. I felt that my path had been enriched even more because I undertook the personal duty of helping people without needing to understand their personal problems. It was not just a matter of transporting a piece of paper, I felt like I was much more than that, a celestial Sherpa. I thought of the world as a sphere of energy that was in motion and in which intentions formed a system of rays with light that circulated around the sphere without stopping, and also infinite because there was always room to add another intention. This was the power of intention, the creation of reality from consciousness. The wizard. The path along the way sometimes forked, and all options were good ones. Sometimes we chose the path on the right instead of the one on the left, sometimes it was the other way around, but we always made sure that we never lost sight of where north was. I wanted to find the North Star. I had been taught how to locate it, but still I had not yet had a chance to see it. That same night I decided to leave my comfortable hostel room, which I shared with Michelle and Patricio, to put my sleeping bag on the terrace. I looked up and saw that it was clear, but that the upper levels of the adjoining building didn't let me see the entire sky. I only saw a bit of it and could not find the star that I was looking for. I stayed there for quite some time to see if it would appear, lifting my head occasionally, but I could not find it. The next night, we passed through a forest where the dry leaves swirled on the ground and the wind moved the treetops, waving its leaves with intensity. They gave us fresh air that reached all the way to the bottom of my lungs and then into my bloodstream, refining my state of consciousness. I felt like I was also giving them something as I walked by them. Their exhalation was my inhalation and my exhalation was their inhalation. We were both part of each other. I saw those specific trees differently. They seemed to glimmer with life, and I also felt like as I was watching them, they too were watching me. On the way out of the forest, we met a wizard named Miguel. He was very wise, he lived in the middle of nature, and it can be said that he was neither good nor bad. And he told us, "Surely you've already met the earth, the wind, and the water." And I answered that yes we had, because I had hugged the trees when I was barefoot, had walked together with the wind, and had looked at my face in the mirror that formed the water of the Channel of Castile. And then he replied, "All in good time. The earth provides silence, wind provides intuition, water provides intention, and fire provides creation. Let's gather firewood for a fire." That night came to my mind when we had tried to start a campfire and the rain had not let us. So we set out to look for branches everywhere before dark, and set them up in a huge pile in the center of a large star-shaped courtyard. At nightfall, all that was visible was the light of the bonfire, which gave off pleasant warmth, and then I heard, "Remember that all this is just a dream, live it with dedication and gratitude." When I came back to, I noticed that Michelle, Patricio, and Miguel had gone to sleep and that I was there alone in front of the bonfire. That's when I looked up at the sky and discovered the North Star. She was so bright. She accompanied me throughout the night, and it was a magical sight with the field of stars dancing around her. Non nobis. The day was cold and a light drizzle rained down, but the inner fire that burned within me, and the irresistible espressos which my new accomplice Patricio and I enjoyed at each stop, had managed to overcome the cold. He had just arrived from the city and he would shake his legs every time we sat down, he smoked incessantly, and often checked his cell phone to find out how his business was doing, how his relatives were, or to listen to the news. He spoke in a strong, anxious tone, without giving way to silence because he considered it an unproductive downtime, and I could not help but notice his lack of acclimatization. I supported him merely with my presence. We arrived at the Cruz de Ferro, the highest point along the French Way. It was a very important place for many pilgrims, because that's where they could leave behind attachments to their past, therefore allowing a sort of rebirth to take place. I remembered the stone Beatrice had given me so long ago, and just like Michel and many other pilgrims had done, I tossed it towards the base of the cross. Patricio left his tears and a sword that he was very fond of, a gift from his deceased father. Michel and I decided to stop at a nearby bench to contemplate the sunset of life, which if contemplated in peace allows us to find the meaning to things. Patricio, however, preferred to continue walking without wasting time and to lose himself in the woods in order to seek comfort. And so we arrived, without Patricio, to a small town called Manjarin. We were surprised to come across a stone building with two huge grey guard dogs that were guarding the entrance. It was full of signs that pointed in all directions, indicating the distance to different cities in the world: 200 kilometers to Santiago, 2,500 kilometers to Rome, 5,000 kilometers to Jerusalem. There were two pilgrims who were very afraid and so did not dare to enter. Michel and I wanted to go in, and when we approached, the dogs began to lick and rub their noses against our bodies. We returned the greeting by petting them on their heads with both of our hands, and we said something to them that they seemed to understand. We passed an entrance hall, full of pictures, photos, sacred relics, and lots of messages hanging over mosaics on the wall. We entered into the next room, which was much darker, and there we found a gentleman, who seemed very focused on his work. He was writing a letter with a pen in the light of a candelabra. In the room there were astronomical instruments, a tau-shaped staff, swords, armors, and on the table there was a compass, maps, a pendulum, and whole bunch of artisanal figurines of pilgrims carved into wood. When he looked up, we recognized his gaze. It was our friend Bernardo. He stood up and quickly walked towards us, bowing his head as a sign of humble reverence. He stood in a part of the room where we could see better because it was next to an opening in the window that lit him up perfectly. With a grin from ear to ear he picked up a chair next to him and sat down with the back of the chair in front of him, leaning on his sturdy arms. This time he was dressed in a thick white long-sleeved coat and told us, "It's nice to see you again, I've been waiting for you." And then he told us that he joined that house which was part of the Order of the Word, conformed by ordinary men in search of excellence. He went to one of the walls and with a heavy sword in hand he returned to us, drew it out and asked us to kneel. Then, with one hand, he placed the tip of the sword vertically on the ground and with the other, with clenched fist, he drew it impetuously towards his chest. And then he began to pray with his eyes closed. Finally, he placed the sword on each of our heads saying, "Non nobis Domini, non nobis, sed nomini tuo de gloriam," from Latin, "Nothing for us, Lord, nothing for us, but only for the glory of your name." When he touched me with the sword, I experienced the same sensations, all at once, that I had experienced with each of the four elements: security, strength, softness, and passion. Then he rolled it up and gave us each a non nobis, a Latin hymn that translates to "not for us" and expresses humility and gratitude. Which was an object that was lighter and more powerful than the sword. When I received the non nobis I felt worthy of love. And when we were about to leave the house, he gave us a strong, merciful embrace, like a hug from a father to a son, and at the same time he exclaimed, "Go with God." Beyond time. After crossing through the village of Villafranca in the region of Bierzo, the landscapes of leafy forests laden with moist air were of spectacular beauty. It was then that we learned that the door of forgiveness, the only place where indulgences could be obtained apart from Santiago, would remain closed until the next year's Jubilee of Compostela. The day passed by calmly until our arrival in the town of Vega de Valcarce. I was walking with Michelle and it was a strange day. She was talking a lot, like never before, and I was remaining quiet. Suddenly, we stopped in front of a house where two elderly ladies were speaking amongst themselves. It wasn't them who caught my attention but a beautiful German shepherd who was with one of them. He was sweet and kind and I enjoyed petting him while he smiled, and then we started to dance together. Annoyed by our racket, the lady suddenly charged the atmosphere with hostility. Not only her words endowed with a strange authority, but also the voice in which she conveyed her message. I could feel her shiver as she said, "Watch out, it's bad." Her words echoed in my ears and in my body, and also in the dog's ears. His smiling face turned into a tense jaw that bared teeth. I could feel his tongue turning, his hair rising, his whole body tensing up. Luckily, I was able to get my hands away before he could bite. A sort of protective shield saved me from his attack. With caution and without turning my back I walked away from him, and then, the lady added softly, "You have to be careful. He doesn't let anyone near him." It was her territory, and the lady's words turned that tender dog into a ferocious beast, revealing the transformative power of language. We got back on the road at noon and started to walk across the village. There was almost nobody in the streets, but suddenly we saw Father Ramiro diving in his car. He seemed to recognize us and greeted us from a distance. We thought maybe it was a friendly gesture towards another person, because he had passed by at full speed, so maybe he had not seen us. I had felt as though several days had passed since my last practice of silence, and I needed to reconnect with myself within that living dream. I watched as Michelle pulled away and I sat on the riverbank surrounded by a captivating forest and a group of cows with cowbells on that magnetized the air. I created my inner space of silence, breath, and inner and outer contemplation in order to revitalize my energies. When I was almost out of town I met a person who was standing at the door of his workshop. He was a private individual, and I dare say that we would not have spoken if I had not taken the initiative. "Good morning. Is it worth visiting the Saracen Castle?" "Don't go there, it doesn't make any sense to visit that place. They are only ruins. There is nothing to see there." His response was so convincing that it confirmed what I had already thought. I wanted to savor some local delicacies, so I stopped in at a fancy restaurant, just in front of the still Valcarce River, to indulge in an assortment of cow and goat cheeses with honey and walnuts accompanied by a Mencia wine, made from some grapes brought to that region centuries ago by French pilgrims who walked the way of St. James. Close to my table was a group of diners wearing couture dresses and complaining about the poor quality of their meals while discussing economic matters. For me, each bite was an exquisite combination of delicious food that miraculously collected and melted in my palate, the result of the combination of the divine offering of the earth and the experienced hands of the cooks. At the end of lunch, I received a message from some friends letting me know about some news that was coming out on the television. I had not paid attention to the news since the beginning of my pilgrimage, and my friends were messengers of nightmares that were not part of my real dream. From what I was told, the world was worsening due to attacks, global violence, countries in conflict, people in crisis, refugee movements, and economies on the brink of collapse, in addition to the worldwide condemnation of the Vatican for its abusive use of money. Anyway, at that moment my attention was focused on other subjects besides those earthly ones, and so I did not give too much importance to the message. I started up a hill to get to Galicia. A few hundred meters up, I met a lady who was also ascending but at a slower pace. She proudly mentioned that she exercised and walked her dog every day to stay active. And thinking about how those who lived in that region did not need anything else, I thought to ask, "Is there something missing in your life?" Her face changed radically with my question. She began to cry like a hopeless child. "I lost my husband a few years ago, and my retirement income is so small that it's not enough for me. My 2 grown-up children are sick and out of work. Everything goes wrong for me." Then she began to complain about wealthy politicians, who wasted public money on alcohol and did not deal with people. "I am walking the way and carrying intentions of other persons to be blessed in the Cathedral of Santiago. I can also take yours there if you wish, provided it is